Hello and welcome to Daily Politics, reaching you from Trust TV here in Abuja. I am Suleiman. Today we discuss an issue that is on the mouth of almost every Nigerian: corruption. Nearly all segments of Nigerian society are in agreement that corruption is perhaps the biggest challenge of development Nigeria faces. The citizens agree. The civil society agrees. And guess what? Even the policy makers agree. In fact, fighting corruption is a big campaign issue for politicians. And since 1999, all Nigerian presidents have promised to fight it, but none more so than President Buhari in 2015. Yet, Nigeria's ranking on most corruption indices has not changed much. And since then, just this week, former head of the defunct pension tax team, Abdul Rashid Maina, was convicted and jailed for 8 years by a federal high court in Abuja. And before then, the ICPC chairman told newsmen that the commission had recovered 301 houses from just 2 public servants. Meanwhile, Nigeria has almost 11 different anti-corruption agencies and committees and laws, from the EFCC to the ICPC, to the Code of Conduct Bureau, to the Presidential Committee Against Corruption, PACAC, to the Attorney General Office, and many more. So Nigerians are asking, are the anti-corruption agencies really working? Or is the scale of corruption in the country simply too much for any anti-corruption agency to do anything about? Or what exactly is the problem? Today, we will be having an open discussion on these questions. And with me are Umar Yakub, the Executive Director of Counter Fraud Center and the retired staff of the EFCC. But also with me is Salahuddin Hashim, who is Senior Program Officer Anti-Corruption for the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, here in Abuja. But before then, we take a minute to bring you a roundup of politics in the news. Please stay tuned.
Some stakeholders of the All Progressive Congress APC have asked the members of the Governor May Malabuni-led Caretaker Extraordinary Convention Planning Committee to step aside to avoid being shown the exit door. Addressing a press conference on Thursday in Abuja, spokesman of the stakeholders, Ayo Oyalowo, said Buni committee has failed to resolve the contentious issues in the party. He argued that the committee was not willing to organize a national convention anytime soon after conducting what he described as the worst ward, local government and state congresses. He said the congresses, rather than put the party on strong footings, had rather created further divisions and disenchantment among its members. Meanwhile, the candidate of the All Progressive Congress in the just concluded Anambra State governorship election, Senator Andy Uba, has rejected the outcome of the polls. Uba said this in a statement signed by the spokesman for the campaign organization, Jerry Ugwoke, on Thursday. He described the results as declared by Independent National Electoral Commission as a charade, which was not reflective of the wishes and aspirations of the people of the state. More facts have emerged on the October 29 raid on Justice Mary Odili's Maitama residence as the police on Thursday paraded 14 suspects involved in the incident in Abuja. The police found out that the team who stormed the apartment were not security operatives. The men were said to have been led by a fake chief superintendent of police, Lawrence Ajojo, who admitted that he was engaged as a consultant by the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami. Parading the suspects at the Force Criminal Investigation Department, Garki Abuja, the Force spokesman, Frank Kumba, said the suspects involved in the criminal act came from different professional backgrounds. Ajojo told journalists that he was not a police officer, adding that he was a consultant to the Attorney General of the Federation.
Welcome back. This is Daily Politics, and let's now get to the discussion proper. So sometimes I start from my right, sometimes I start from my left. So let me start from my right today. But Mr. Salahuddin, your work has mainly been within anti-corruption, and particularly for CISLAC. Is corruption too much in Nigeria that anti-corruption can do anything about it? As in, should we just lose hope that there is nothing anyone can do to fight corruption again?
All right, thank you very much. I think I will begin by saying that prebendalism is actually the character of the Nigerian state, and that in itself characterized the kind of fallout that we have experienced. And of course, in your intro, you had mentioned very clearly that since the return to democracy in 1999, we have seen quite a number of attempts. But I would like you to also go back in history to tell you that post-colonial Nigeria, that the fight against corruption has been like an occupation.
Yes.
If you check for every regime, the fight against corruption has always remained on the agenda.
Yes.
Check every inaugural speech for any administration post-colonial Nigeria. The fight against corruption has always remained on the agenda. But the paradox is that after that inaugural speech, the successive administration becomes even more corrupt than the previous administration that they either succeeded or they chased out of office. And that includes both democratic and the military junta. And the challenge for me is very fundamental. It is about the willpower to be able to take this forward. We have agencies, we have institutions, and of course we put measures in place. But unfortunately, the means to getting these things through are deliberately removed from the entire infrastructure. If you have an infrastructure to fight corruption,
such as the anti-corruption agency,
absolutely, and then you make it look like a mere slogan. You don't fight corruption by mere sloganeering. You fight corruption by putting infrastructures on agenda and effective programs in place that will be able to deter and prevent and contain. But what we find is a situation where those who sit within the corridors of designing the policies have also created lacuna that would also allow for an escape. Just in case they are caught within it. And of course, you just referenced the...
Thank you. Let me bring
okay.
our second guest into the discussion. But unlike most other people who lament corruption, you have actually fought it. You've worked for the EFCC, been part of investigations and prosecutions. Is it the political will alone that is lacking? Has he alluded to? Or are there other things, such as capacity within the anti-corruption agencies, that also make it difficult for Nigeria to get ahead in the anti-corruption fight?
Okay, thank you for inviting me. Anti-corruption, like so many other things, is an infinite game.
Okay.
You have finite games and infinite games. Some games end at a certain time. But I call it an infinite game because anti-corruption needs to continue evolving. Politicians are changing, governments are changing, technologies are coming in. The world is moving from 3G to 4G to 5G.
And the mode of corruption is also changing.
Exactly. So you have to continue to adapt. So sometimes when you are measuring corruption, you will find out that it seems like nothing is being done. The problem is sometimes the law enforcement on the environment does not adapt to changes. Now there are new crimes. If you look at most arrests now by the EFCC, for example, is mostly under cybercrime. Because now technology has enhanced criminality to another level, where from your room you can move 100 million, 200 million naira, unlike before where you have to go and steal it maybe through the paper or so on and so forth. So it's not like nothing is being done. But I just feel that Nigeria needs to be adapting to the changes the world is going over, because now there's globalization. Because of globalization, money laundering, illicit financial flows are moving more and more. So Nigeria just needs to be adapting with the criminals, because in all criminal cases, you find that the criminals are usually 10 steps ahead,
several steps ahead of
the law enforcement.
The law enforcement, yes.
So it's just that adaptation that is a problem, and seeing it as an infinite game.
Thank you. That takes us to an interesting dimension of anti-corruption fight in the country. He mentioned the people doing cyberspace and corrupt activities online. And how, of course, every day you read the newspaper, you find that the EFCC or ICPC are arresting many of this. But that leads to the charge against the anti-corruption agencies that they are only able to catch the small fishes in the river. You know, that the politically exposed persons, people who actually have power and abuse their power to enrich themselves, or at least abuse power they don't get caught, and when they get caught, they through the justice system, they don't get any punishment at all. So how does that compare? We're catching young people who maybe because of lack of opportunities, whereas the people who are in power and engaging in corrupt practices are going scot-free. Is that the case, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, he mentioned a very fundamental point, and that for me would be my starting point, and that is the essence of fighting digital crime with an analog system. Okay. It is a fundamental gap. Okay, and for me, I think the issue remains that we foresaw that this was going to happen like 30 years ago when the issue of the advanced fee fraud, started. And of course, we didn't conceptualize it. And of course, we didn't have that forecast to be able to understand that, okay, there is going to be a transition in the kind of criminality that would come. And the second thing is the fact that you are using corruption to fight corruption, okay? Then you want to fight digital crime. You have a cyber security strategy, okay, to fight digital crime. And then, of course, you do not either resource or that the funding meant to resource those fighting, to procure infrastructure are also being looted. Okay, so that also brings to question what is the real rationale behind, and that was why I refer to it as mere sloganeering. And the second thing is the issue of the capacity, which I have mentioned. I mean, you mentioned that very clearly. Prosecutor team and the investigator team and the reconciliation between the both system is always a very big fault line. And it happens like that a lot of the time when a politically exposed person is involved. Because you begin to find a lot of anomaly. Then there is a deliberate will not to be capacitated. Then somebody begins to demonstrate that he doesn't know how to do the job. And I tell you, one of the things you find in most of our agencies are human capital. Okay, I think we have that. But what we do not have is that use the same measure that we have applied in fighting smaller crime, in busting those big crimes. Look, we have been able to bust big crime like the Evans. We have busted bigger crime. But the fact is that then what happens? Is it that when the circle of beneficiaries is then imploded, that is when some certain individuals are exposed? Or that a lot of the year, every year, the Auditor General report, even though it comes very late, sometimes 3-4 years, the Auditor General report tells us of agencies that take money or don't remit, or that they don't have proper record, year in, year out, and nothing happens. And these agencies are listed. That for me suggests that there is a huge challenge.
Thank you. That takes us to another area of this issue. Even the agencies that don't have proper records sometimes include the anti-corruption agencies themselves. For example, you go online, you can't find a record of what the FCC did last year or the year before last, and so on and so forth. And this has led to charges of relooting the looted or recovered loots. That there are no records for the proceeds recovered from politicians or from people who have been accused of corruption. To what extent does that undermine confidence in anti-corruption agencies?
Okay, I would agree with you in one aspect and disagree with you in another aspect.
Please.
If you are aware of the work we did last month, that's the CSO arm of our company, Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity Watch.
Okay.
We looked at 5 key variables under procurement, human resources,
information,
accessibility, information, budget, procurement, to see how MDAs, including the anti-corruption agencies, are releasing vital information to the public. And under it, there were 31 sub-variables. So, drawing from what you are saying, if they were publishing their information, it will build confidence in the public that these agencies are doing the right thing. But unfortunately, the compliance level is low across board. It's not only the anti-corruption agency, everybody is low. So what we should be advocating for is for them to be publishing information. Because under UNCAC principles, transparency is a key component of anti-corruption. Now, once it's transparent, people cannot even take it. So sometimes you actually see allegation, and I'm not here to defend the anti-corruption agencies, not at all. But there are sometimes you see allegations of loot be reluted or recovered proceeds of crime be reluted, honestly, is actually almost impossible.
Okay.
That's what people don't know, because you have 2 or 3 categories of crime. Now you either recover the money from a complainant, let's say you complain to a law enforcement agency, so your eye is there. That money cannot be reluted, because when they recover it, they have to return it back to you. Now the second victim could be a state. Let's say Bayelsa State, Ekiti State, Kaduna State. Their money, their eyes are on it, so they have to look at it, and if they recover it, it has to be returned. The third component is international asset recovery. Sometimes our looters take money outside the country. Now there's an international asset recovery process under the UNCAC principles. So it's not so easy to reloot
what has been recovered.
Yes, it's not that easy, because they are complainants, quote and unquote, of this process. So when the anti-corruption agencies take these things, where the abuse usually comes in is not the way it's really being portrayed in the public. It could be maybe an asset has been seized, and while they are seized it, but maybe somebody is renting it, things
so,
like that.
But if that is true, you know, and this question goes to the two of you, one following the other. If that is true, why do we have a situation where Ibrahim Magu, former chairman of the EFCC, because this is exactly in June last year, this is exactly what he was accused of, to have reluted the recovered proceeds. So how could he have been accused of what you are saying is almost impossible to do?
Yes, if you follow the trend, thank God you're a journalist. The first chairman of the EFCC, if you Google now, you hear he took so billion amount.
Yes.
The second chairman, Mr. Ibrahim Lamodi, the same thing. The third chairman was Farida Waziri, the same thing. The fourth chairman, Ibrahim Magu, the same thing. So accusations are not facts. So honestly, it's not evidence. Anybody can accuse anybody of stealing money, but what are the facts? As of today, I'm not aware, maybe it has been released, of a report stating where any of these EFCC chairmen, I'm not speaking for them.
Yes.
I'm speaking on facts or what is evidence in the public. I'm not aware of any report that has inducted any of these EFCC chairmen stating where they took or looted funds. I'm not aware of any report.
Okay, thank you. So, but this also takes us deeper into questions of politics of anti-corruption itself, because you're talking about the various instances in which people are accusing even the heads of anti-corruption agencies of corruption. What sorts of politics drive anti-corruption in the country, and how can we mitigate against these kinds of politics?
I think first of all is to have a very clear strategy in terms of how we intend to go about it. And when he made the submission earlier, he talked about Nigerians are very creative. Okay, and that unfortunately, it will shock him if he probably realizes the kinds of things that goes on behind the cabinet. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, with the kind of work that I do, I've been able to also dig deeper to check a number of things, and I realize that sometimes some of the expose, really throws you off balance, and it is always like that, because you ask yourself, how come then most of those reports are not made public?
Yes.
Okay, then that is the first question we need to ask. We heard Lamode took 1 trillion, amounting to that amount. How come up until today there is no public, that the report was not made public? The issue of Magu has also not been made public. The issue of Farida Waziri has also not been made public. The issue is simply put that once a politically exposed person is involved, the game changes. And until we resign and change the approach, we will continue to go in that manner, and it still takes us to the single fact that the issue of the fight against corruption remains a slogan. ICPC released the report last year, and that was over the COVID period. And they told us that in one person's account, school feeding program, and the money, the proceeds, that they got over 1.6 trillion, from one individual's account, with over 200 properties, recovered from a single individual, a bureaucrat, civil servant. And for me, I think that is where the problem truly lies. The devil is actually seated within the bureaucracy of our public service.
Thank you.
Political office is there, but I tell you, any political officer is actually introduced to corruption by the bureaucrats. So we need to be able to put adequate infrastructure for prevention. Now, there is something they call the ACTUS, Anti-Corruption Transparency Unit in various MDAs. But the fact is that because of the absence of the willpower to fight, you bring a very low-ranking officer to be an ACTU officer, and you expect him to be able to, that is a major challenge. How do we begin to design workable strategies, things that are real, that we can relate with? We all know that in civil service, you definitely cannot go over the board to ask a PAMSEC or some specific kind of question. And as a matter of fact, it is impossible. Okay? So if you want to get results, then you need to get through it from the design stage. Our design stage to the fight against corruption is faulty. And we need to get it right.
Interesting. So that takes us to the regulatory framework around anti-corruption, you know, the laws, the regulations, but also how they are implemented in the country. This is the issue. Is it that the laws don't really back, let alone bite? They're just there to show that, to demonstrate that, like he said, slogan that we are fighting corruption?
Okay, my view, in line with what my brother has said, is I'm sure from the research of CISLAC and other CSOs all over the world, the largest aspect of corruption is public sector corruption. Now, under public sector corruption, I will tell you 80 to 90% is under procurement.
Okay.
So now if you have the area where the problem is to target that area. Now, what happens under procurement? You now go and apply measures. The laws are already there. BPP is there. And states, under the UNCAC principle, states to have their own procurement agencies to follow the rules. But still, money goes under. So it means the problem is not the law. Now, you are supposed to have institutions. The institutions are there to measure, ensure that these people do not do the wrong things. The institutions are there. But money is still being looted. So what is the problem? My own view is reduce the human intervention in procurement process.
Okay. Now, use technology or what? Okay.
Countries that have done well in Europe and some Asian countries have applied technology throughout the procurement process. Now look at the scenario where MDA1 wants to procure, let's say, cars. Number one is online. Companies will go and bid online, and the requirements are online. Now, if the online, you don't do it there, automatically it disqualifies you. So that removes the human factor of the civil servant,
who will want to take additional 10% or 20% for himself. Yes,
he cannot even know who has qualified, and it's technology that will do it. After that qualification, you want to purchase. The prices of cars are online. There is no need. You cannot even inflate it. They are online.
Mr. Slaudin, but these are interesting discussions.
Absolutely.
But to implement that, you need political will. That's one. Secondly, it also takes us to this idea about the gap between Nigerians' perception of corrupt people and those who actually engage in corruption in the country. Because for the average Nigerian, it is the politicians who probably have the most opportunities for corruption. But based on what you two are saying, maybe the heart of it might be in the bureaucracy rather than in political office. So if that is the case, if that, for example, is the case, particularly his example of procurement, 80-90% being in procurement, does it then mean that all these laws against corruption that this government has come up with, such as the TSA, the BVN, and these other ones, are they just to entertain us,
that's
or
why
to
I
fight
said
corruption?
That's why you need to see how public officers can be very creative. Once there is an attempt to, traditional approach does not fight digital corruption. Okay, and of course, because of the advanced nature of, we need to also find a way to step up our existing programming. For instance, I will take the whistleblower policy, for instance.
Okay.
Why hasn't it become a law, you know, a legal framework that also has a component for witness protection?
Okay.
Because if you ask me to blow a whistle, we have seen we have a legal center where we take cases from public offices, those who have been witch hunt. A lot of people are being witch hunt. There are retributions. You know, there are backlash. There are people who suffer some kind of injustice just because they exposed a particular process. Although you may not say if it was a deliberate will to expose or that you have been sidelined from the entire, but we know too well that there is always an exposure. Then there is this attempt by the state to refuse to protect the integrity or the information of those people who have come forward to volunteer information. So it is important that when we are putting some of these things in place, what I have come to discover is that we like to copy policies and programmings from developed climes, and that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yes.
But if we are pasting, we need to also be very careful so that we adapt it to suit our local context.
And copy and paste cannot work for anti-corruption, isn't it? Yeah, thank you, Malim. Just before we go on break, he's raised other issues, mostly that this copy and paste kind of anti-corruption policies. So there's this general argument that the nature of corruption determines the nature of anti-corruption or response to it. So if Nigeria has a different form of corruption from other countries, then it will need to have different sets of ways of fighting corruption. So you don't need anti-corruption agencies in Nigeria, or you may not need anti-corruption agencies in Nigeria the way you have in other countries, merely because the problem here might go beyond what an anti-corruption agency can deal with. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, he's right, quite right, Sislak. But the issue is you have to understand that Nigeria is one country amongst 200 countries. And all these laws are driven by international principles. Whatever you are setting up, you have to draw from United Nations Convention Against Corruption. You have to look at the UNODC. You have to look at the Financial Action Task Force. There are so many other little pieces of legislation which you have to, by law, domesticate. That is why we have the EFCC, the ICPC, and the NFIU, and that's why we have civil society, because it's a key component. But where he is right again is they always tell you, take reasonable measures to adapt situations peculiar to your country. Now you know your country better than the man in Switzerland. So you now take your own measures to make sure do not be using analog methodology to fight a digital methodology or vice versa. So I agree with him completely in that, and I think that's what we need to do a lot of advocacy on the law enforcement side. Another thing I'd like to say before we go on breaks, there are some countries that the anti-corruption, the strongest anti-corruption pillar is actually the CSO.
Okay.
Yes. So CSO...
The citizens.
The citizens.
And their civil society organizations.
Including the media.
Okay.
They are the strongest pillar because they are the ones, when they shout, no public servant will take a kobo. So here too, we have to advocate for more civil society. All of us, we actually need to do more, and more people need to come in. Not for civil society that just come to take money and I'm sure he knows what I'm talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, people that come and do the right thing, the media and the radio. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much, gentlemen. When we come back, we'll be looking at these issues, particularly what Nigerians as citizens can also do in terms of public accountability. But that would be when we come back. We'll be taking a minute to take a break. When we return, the discussion will continue. Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is Daily Politics on Trust TV, and today we're discussing corruption. So before we went on break, you were talking about what citizens can do to actually help, maybe civil society groups and so on. But before we go to that, what about this idea that maybe Nigeria has too many anti-corruption agencies? You have Code of Conduct Bureau, anti-corruption. You have the EFCC, anti-corruption. You have the ICPC, anti-corruption. You have this SCONUL, SCUMOL, anti-corruption. And then you have other agencies like PACAC now, a committee, anti-corruption. And then you have all this, there are quite many, in addition to the police, in addition to the Office of the Attorney General of Police, Office of the Attorney General and many others. So does that mean, you, Mr. Salahuddin, does that mean then that this is a problem? Do we need to have an Orosanye report and merge these agencies or something?
I agree with you completely. It is not about numbers. It is about the efficiency, in some of these agencies. For all of these agencies that you have mentioned, there is one common denominator, that there is no resourcing to the kind of work they do. Look at the Auditor General's report. The report of the Auditor General should be the terminal point for the budget cycle. And that means that report should be considered before the next fiscal year so that the agencies can check. So the National Assembly that has the power to oversight can check the agencies that have either faulted or still have monies. But what we just do every year is that we don't consider that report before the next fiscal regime is passed. In fact, sometimes and most of the report comes 5 years into the new year. But for now, I think we are just considering about 2000 and...
yes, and the media don't even report on it as much as they should.
So that's the major challenge. So we don't fund it. If you check the Auditor General office, there used to be a 1-2 bedroom until recently. So there is this challenge to deliberately, stifle those agencies that have the responsibility to act. You don't get funding from it. Check the Auditor General's office. Check other agencies like that. They are deliberately not resourced. So that at least they will not be able to engage constructively. So it is not in the number. It is about the efficiency. It is about the digitalization. And he mentioned that very clearly. There is this thing that the Accountant General Office did, where they actually had a dashboard, where you can actually post information and check which agency is doing what. There is a need to be able to look at that and make it public and create this kind of simulation to get people's confidence to use them. If the General's report is released and there are recommendations and specific agencies are mentioned, and I was shocked at the last one that even the agency that the president actually oversights was actually also mentioned in that particular report. So it suggests very clearly that this is actually a problem that requires a whole of society approach. Then there is one thing that we must do. We need to go back again and do an audit of our existing anti-corruption laws. There are too myriad, there are too many. We need to audit them and use the recommendation from that audit process to re-engineer the process.
Thank you. So I take you straight from where he just landed, from audit of anti-corruption laws, but also their implementation. For example, many Nigerians on social media, it was trending that Minor, after 8 years, that the case has been going, almost 9 years that the case has been going on in court, he's just going home with 8 years of jail sentence. What does that show about what does that say about our anti-corruption laws? Does it not show that, anyone can do what they want and get away with it?
Well, sir, that is a little bit subjective. It's not an objective thing. It's difficult to assess. What the principles usually say, apply measures, deterrents that are dissuasive enough. Now, according to what Mr. Salahuddin has been saying, the political will for our judiciary or our lawmakers to make it dissuasive enough. If you steal a chicken now, you can see sometimes somebody will steal a chicken or a bicycle and he goes for 2 years. Now, you now launder 2-3 billion, you still go for 3 years. You see, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense. But you have to now look at who are those that make the laws. Every law has to go through the National Assembly. Now, who are those in the National Assembly? What brings them there is our political process. So, and the starting point for most developed countries is the political process. Once you then get your politics right, every other thing will fall. And now our political process is nowhere near right. Because to even get to where you are, a lot of corruption entails. You have to have a lot of money. Usually it's the richest man that gets nominated. Is the richest man that gets elected. How you call the election is selection. You understand? So now already he has a debt that he has to pay. He used 1-2 billion to become a governor. The first thing you do is try to steal. If you look at the Paris Club report now, in fact, I don't even know which series to refer to.
Yes.
As soon as they returned the money, all of them started looting. The money was just started disappearing, left, right, and center, left, right, and center. So I think, like the Anambra election, now, if you look at the process, because they brought some level of technology there, it was free and fair, and the most popular candidate won. Now, if we could do that and get our politics right, where we have to now reduce the cost of politics, I think it's one of the highest in the world. If it started from the INEC budget, I think is way too much.
Yes.
Over 200 billion to run an election.
To just conduct elections. And there will be no food or hospitals or schools after elections.
Exactly.
Good
now
point.
that is an aspect of the INEC. Now think of the money that the politicians have to spend on electioneering. And where is the source of this money? Public funds.
Yes.
So because it's too expensive. But now when you design your politics where only the best can come out, the most competent can come out with the least cost, you find out the other sectors will be better.
Thank you. So following up on that, part of the political process is the appointment of respective persons to man the anti-corruption agencies themselves. For example, the appointment of the Attorney General, the Auditor General that you mentioned. Yeah. In 2003, I remember when the Vincent, the Auditor General at the time, released the report. It was the first time it was sold, and it was quite damning. What happened was that he found the way out. You know, he was thrown out of this position, and maybe since then, other attorney generals have learned to not make too much noise around their reports, their annual reports, since that time. So the president has a lot of power in appointing people into offices that can actually help to check corruption, such as the anti-corruption agencies themselves. So what happens to this power? Is it too much? Is it used wisely on behalf of Nigeria?
I think generally when we discuss this, and again it still boils down to sloganeering, when we talk about restructuring, part of the restructuring that I think will require is to do a clear-cut analysis around not about the division of people. When we talk about people talk about division, it is not about that. It's about agenda. It's about programs. It's about the existing power that the president wields. It's about the judiciary, because all of these things we are talking about around corruption, if the judiciary is sound and efficient and robust and forward-looking, there will be a lot of situation that will create preventive diplomacy around the fight against corruption. Look at the issue of James Ibori, for instance. Okay, he pleaded not guilty, went through the judicial process. He was discharged and acquitted, but he went to the London where the case. And he was actually convicted. And he actually served his
the same case.
On the same case. So then you do a comparative analysis, and it tells you very clearly that there is something fundamentally wrong with our own environment. That it is an environmental issue. Then that was why I said, look, we need to first of all audit the existing frameworks that actually deals with the issue of corruption. Look at MENA issue. Do you know MENA in the past had gone off the case? Okay, was actually told to go home and sin no more, and was slammed with a fine of 750,000. Okay, and was reinstated. And that in itself suggested to us that what we see, I think we are just being very modest when we say it is actually corruption that we have in our system. What we have is an organized crime.
Absolutely.
What we have is an organized crime.
Do you agree?
Because to be very honest, there is a chain, there is a value chain of beneficiaries. So if you actually used proceeds of crime to oil the anti-corruption system, then there are opportunities that you are going to. So it means that there is a need for the executive, legislature, and the judiciary to again do some kind of review analysis around what exactly is the status of the fight against corruption. What can we do differently? But to be very honest, what we have existing will only continue to serve. I mean, we look at the case of the existing senator from the southeast, Orji Uzokali. He is actually let off the hook. He was convicted. On technicalities. Then the court came in and said, look, that they should order a retrial, and vacated the judgment. And then there is a court judgment now, or there's an order that is now saying that EFCC shouldn't further, open
that case.
And you ask yourself, who issues this kind of order? And I tell you, the judiciary is one of the biggest problems we have. Because the kind of orders and counter orders and ex parte application that is been, and that is why the president might have approached it wrongly. But I think the judiciary requires a complete overhaul and reform. They are fundamentally the challenge and creating setback to the fight against corruption in this country.
Thank you. Well, to what extent then does that lead us to talk about having a special court, a special anti-corruption court, in which judges are specially meant to fight, to adjudge or to oversee corruption cases and nothing else? Maybe that will fast track cases, that will improve issues of capacity, because every day you are dealing with anti-corruption cases and so on. Do you think that's a way out within the judiciary?
No, you are creating another problem out of another problem.
Okay.
When you can't solve a problem, you create another one. It's like when you spoke about agencies. If you know the history of how these agencies were created, and some say, okay, the police was not doing well, you created ICPC. Okay, ICPC was not doing well, you create EFCC. So you continue, it's a motto, it's not the problem. I remember 2014 or 15, somebody, Mr. Balasanga, created under the NODC how sentencing guidelines for corruption cases. Now, sentencing guidelines, if you go through it, is almost like a special court. It's just telling the judge, okay, when it's a corruption case, especially involving a PEP, this is what you should do. And the procedures are very clear and straightforward. Now, how far have we implemented it? Tomorrow you create special courts, they get bad. What do you do now? You go back to regional courts or state courts. So I'll still insist, the more we remove human element in decision making, the better. Now, when the investigation is done properly, the prosecution is done properly,
but technology can be rigged. For example, you can hack into it. You can set it up in ways that will benefit one side right from day one. So, and that's human element as well. So how do we handle? Yes, and how do we? Yeah,
it will leave a trace.
Okay.
Now people that like to pose.
There are many that don't leave traces. For example, the recent Israeli fishing whatever they said, it doesn't leave a trace that is easy for any person to just trace.
Now people
that is, technology has its own limitations. That's what we are trying to say.
I agree with you, but people that like to pose that argument, like during the last elections, why they didn't pass the electoral bill, and the National Assembly was saying that there's no network in so many villages, that is why there will not be electronic voting. Now, but how come there's electronic banking everywhere?
Yes. And it works, even in villages. Yes.
In villages.
Yes.
Even when there's no network, they move to the next village and do. So why can't we get our voting right? That is why I'm even an advocate, not of electronic voting, of online voting. The machines must not even be there. Go online. Yes, it can be hacked, but all our banks are moving and trillions are moving in every day.
They are not hacked every day.
Yes, there is fraud. Yes, there is. But what is the percentage of the fraud? Vis-a-vis, imagine us having a credible electoral system where all votes will count and the credible candidates will be the winners. Vis-a-vis how much what we have now, the kind of caliber of people that we have, the mediocrity we have everywhere else. Just think about it. Yes, it may be rigged, but at least it will produce the best.
Thank you. So that leads us directly to what citizens too can do. Because citizens are the first level of public accountability. They elect the leaders who then govern them over time. So what can citizens do?
Citizens policing is the first thing that comes to mind, that everybody anywhere sees the fight against corruption as a responsibility. Once we create that trust and confidence, and of course citizens know that there will not be any repercussion, if they volunteer information, then people can then begin to offer information. So intelligence gathering, using artificial intelligence, using intelligence to fight corruption is one of the best ways to be able to do that. And developed countries have seen it as a leeway, and they have actually latched on it, and that is why they found out that, okay, building active citizenship is one of the best approach to fighting any social crime. And that has actually worked. So the first thing we must do is to build active citizenship and allow citizens to take the responsibility to drive the process. That was the attempt, or that is the attempt with the whistleblower policy. But unfortunately, they created a roadblock around it, okay? So if you do those kind of things and leave the issue of protection for those who volunteer that information, then it goes a very long way. Then he had mentioned the issue of digital approach to this fight. That is very fundamental. Then the third thing is that we need to build the capacity of existing bureaucrats who are charged with the responsibility to fight. These guys are nowhere near the technological age. Most of them are old, most of them are advanced, most of them don't even understand the softwares that are being used anymore. These things are new. It doesn't take anything away from you. Bring in young, vibrant, dynamic IT guys.
But you have a 40-year-old who is now chairman of the ICCs. Isn't that a good example?
That is a good attempt.
That a good example?
That is a good attempt. Okay. Now, what is the recruitment process? Okay. And that is the fundamental. If you know too well that you are going to fight digital crime, you don't have to be chasing people over on the street and chasing people on the road. I think that with his vibrant young nature, that there should be a little bit of de-escalation of that kind of system and methodology,
in the last 1 year,
technology. Okay,
has that made a difference in the last 1 year? A new FCC chairman?
Well, for me, I think he has made a lot of difference in the sense that I'm not even looking at whether he's young or not. It's a capacity. Because I'm not an advocate of the young. You can put a young person. We have a lot of young people that are disappointed.
Absolutely.
So many of them. So it's young and capacity. And based on what he took over from, he has done well. Now the structure, it's making it look like I'm speaking for the EFCC. So next I invite the EFCC people, let them speak.
Yes.
But they have set up a very better structure now, administrative structure where people even know where there's a strategic direction of the commission now. It was in the public domain. That's where I read it. There's a strategic direction for that. Now, they got a vote for technological applications. I don't know what it's meant for, but I think it's more to focus on cybercrime, because the cybercrime thing is very, very bad. A lot of people, retirees, are losing a lot of money, pensioners. So I think they're investing in that. And they're doing a lot of recruitment process with the bias for people in ICT. And they're doing that because, like I said, it's an infinite game. You have to continue adapting. And that's what I know. So, and even the ICPC, Professor Bolaji, I think he's doing very well too. There are a lot of things. So he's not that young. He's a young man, but he's doing well. So I think the youth is important, but you have to know what you are doing. So right now, I think with the EFCC and ICPC, at least those two agencies, I think we have gotten it right. So maybe let's just give them some time and see
where they take us to. So that leads to the broader questions of whether we need ICPC and EFCC all together, whether or not the fight against corruption actually harms the economy, because it gets people into jails, but then the monies that they have looted, they don't get to become useful for the economy. You know, the argument that what is important is to build the economy, and then anti-corruption will catch up over time. You know, so what do you say to that? Do we really need to? Should we bother more about economic development and growth than to worry about fighting corruption as a country?
My point is that there is a nexus between the two. If you want to advance in terms of economic development, foreign direct investors want to be sure that, one, that they are safe. One of the things that baffles me most within
what you want from foreign investors, foreign direct, is what you already have people who have stolen. For example, there's this idea that in the last 10 years, for example, the Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, he's been doing this anti-corruption. There's this argument that part of the reason why the economy there has been slowing down pandemic is precisely because he was saying that he is fighting corruption. So leading to confusion, within the economy.
No,
so
but for a long
time, the foreign investment you are talking about is already what Nigerians have. You just mentioned that somebody stole 1.6 trillion themselves. That's almost how many billion US
Absolutely.
dollars. You understand?
Absolutely.
If you have $1 billion US flowing into Nigeria, that's like $3 billion US dollars or 4. If you have $3 billion US dollars, if you have $3 billion coming into Nigeria, you would say that that's a huge amount of foreign investment. But one person within Nigeria has stolen it. So people are saying that if you're not bothered too much about fighting corruption and you give that person opportunity to actually invest that money, it will still create jobs, it will benefit the economy and so on and so forth.
But if you check existing tradition, you will know that anybody who steals money does not want somebody else to steal from him. So he does not invest.
Okay.
Because for him, if he invests, he gives room for someone else
to benefit
or take the money from him. So he runs away. And the second thing is that for you to develop economically, you actually need to earn forex. Okay. And that means you need to actually get foreign investors to actually come in here. Remember that the money that have been stolen locally are money that have been expended in the budget. They have already been taken as being spent. So somebody else just misappropriated or misguided but the money has actually been calculated as being spent. So for any reason, that fellow, if he reinjects it back to the economy, that is actually supposed to be another ball game entirely. Recall that at the early stage of this administration, that the conversation around plea bargaining became very popular. Okay, and it works to a large extent.
Yes.
Okay, where some people will say, okay, you have been said to have stolen XYZ. Are you able to return some certain amount? And then, of course, we can reconsider the entire conversation around your punishment and all that. And that is where the issue of reparation and retributive justice actually comes in. But fundamentally, if you want to grow and advance economically, you need to earn forex. And if you are earning forex and don't have a local security, local financial security for an investor to know that there is a mitigation, there is a mitigation to any attempt to want to actually defraud him of his money, then he's confident, okay? But if that is not happening, then there is a lot of challenge. And that is why the economic recovery and growth plan that I have seen, I have not seen any deliberate effort in trying to create this sort of local infrastructure to protect, okay, any foreign investor that is coming with any form of investment. So one of the reasons why you have seen economies slowing down in the last few years is because of apathy, investment apathy.
Yeah, thank you. We've come virtually to the end of the program. So you'll be giving us the last question will go to you. We started here, we're ending here. So he raised quite a number of issues, including, for example, issue of whether or not plea bargains, what is due for Nigeria, but also issues of corruption in the private sector as well, which the judge trying the minor case actually talked about. She berated the banks for aiding and abetting corruption that she was sentencing minor for. In your view, to what extent do banks specifically, but also the private sector in general, as a last word, to what extent do we have, do our anti-corruption practices need to reflect on the corruption in the private sector or its association with public sector to make things work? Yeah.
Okay, and there's no corruption that can succeed without vehicles to either do one of two things. To either launder the money or elicit financial flows. Based on what you were saying earlier on, there's corruption in every country in the world. But why Africa suffers the most, where we lose up to the last estimate $50 billion a year, is I think we're the only continent where money goes out and nothing comes in. That's why the suffering is much more, the impact is felt. There are some countries in the East, 20, 30 years ago, Nigeria was better. But because of those illicit financial flows, their real estate is high, their tourism is high, so many other things they have developed, quote and unquote. Yeah, so the vehicle for money laundering, of course, well, based on the last GRBA report, there's for financial institutions and designated non-financial institutions. Of course, for the financial institutions, is the deposit money banks and the BDCs.
Okay.
These two are featured in almost every report at heavy vehicles for money laundering. In the designated non-financial institutions, it's usually the legal practitioners and the real estate industry. Most people love to buy houses in, I'm sure you have seen the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers. All the papers you see is usually real estate stocks, the Paradise Papers, real estate, globally. So these are the vehicles. So that is why there are measures. When you're talking about too many anti-corruption agencies, yes, there should be better efficiency. They are not too many per se, but if there was more efficiency, we would have
each of
seen
them. Okay.
Yeah, like that. So they all have different rules to play. One for the financial sector, designated financial sector, public sector corruption, and other areas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming, and thank you for a very engaging discussion.
Yes,
I think that brings us to the end of the program today. Thank you for staying with us, and do join us again same time tomorrow for yet another episode of Daily Politics. I am your regular host, Suleiman Suleiman. Enjoy the rest of your day.